In the year 523 after Christ, a woman named Theodora was made to shimmer like the sun itself. Molten gold poured upon her flesh, each drop sealing breath and sin alike, as 50,000 voices rose, not in mourning, but in awe. What began as punishment became devotion. What began as flesh became legend. And what followed was so blasphemous the scribes of empire struck her name from the record. They almost succeeded, but tonight we summon what they buried, before the gates of empire open again. Tell me, traveler, where do you watch from? From the streets of Istanbul, the ruins of Rome, the lights of New York? Across centuries, our voices weave through the same dust that once swallowed hers. Touch the bell. Mark your place among the witnesses, for this is no mere remembrance. This is resurrection. Picture it. The Hippodrome of Constantinople, the noon sun cutting through the marble colonnades, banners trembling in the wind. Soldiers line the arena, shields gleaming, faces hard as the stone beneath them. And in the center, bound to a white pedestal, stands a woman, her hair unbound, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the palace walls shimmer. This was Theodora, a courtesan from the city's entertainment quarter. Not the Empress who would one day rule beside Justinian, but a performer, dancer, mimic, satirist, too clever for her own safety, too visible for her own salvation. She had mocked a sacred procession, parodied the Virgin's walk through the streets. For that, the priests demanded not blood, but purification. By gold. The executioner carried a bowl that caught the sunlight like a flame. Theodora trembled as he lifted the brush, dipped it, and drew the first stroke across her shoulder. The crowd gasped. Wherever the liquid touched, her skin turned to gold. Slowly, carefully, the priest began to chant, "Let her shame become sanctity. Let her beauty be sealed in eternity." Each stroke shimmered, layer upon layer, until her body blazed like a statue come to life. The air smelled of honeyed metal and sweat. At first, the people cheered. They thought it a miracle, the transformation of sin into splendor. No one noticed that she had stopped blinking. Gold leaf suffocates. It seals every pore, traps the body's heat until it begins to cook itself from within. Theodora's heart began to race. Beneath the metallic sheen, her skin blistered, her blood boiled, her breath came shallow. To the crowd, her tremors looked divine. To her, they were agony. John Malalas, the Byzantine chronicler who dared to write of it, recorded a single line. She was radiant as the sun, and the sun took her breath away. When they gilded her lips, she could no longer cry out. Her final breath shimmered beneath the thin veil of metal. The priest raised his hands and declared, "She shall not die in flesh, but in form." The audience erupted, convinced they had witnessed sanctification. What they had truly seen was a woman being burned alive, one heartbeat at a time. Centuries later, a sealed cistern beneath Sultanate was unearthed during construction. Inside were bones laced with gold dust, fused into strange crystalline layers. Under a microscope, scientists found traces of human collagen trapped beneath gold leaf, proof that whoever she was, she had been alive during the gilding. The technique matched Byzantine ceremonial coatings used only for icons and sacred relics. Except this time, the relic had been human. Was Theodora the first, or merely the one they failed to erase? In Byzantine law, execution was theater. Punishment was performance. The line between faith and spectacle blurred until cruelty became devotion. Her gilding wasn't meant to destroy her. It was meant to immortalize her. Her beauty turned divine. Her suffering transformed into proof of God's judgment. But something went wrong. Within days, witnesses whispered that her golden figure still radiated heat at night, that her eyes glimmered faintly when touched by moonlight. Pilgrims came to kneel before her. Others swore they smelled incense and burning flesh in the empty arena. Fear spread faster than faith. By imperial decree, the figure was removed under cover of darkness. The gold was melted down, recast into chalices for the Hagia Sophia, holy vessels born from desecration. Theodora's body, or what remained of it, vanished from the record. All that survives is a marginal note in a 6th century psalter. The idol still breathes beneath the earth. For centuries, scholars dismissed the account as apocrypha, a moral fable disguised as history, a parable meant to warn women of vanity and men of excess. They said no execution could be so elaborate, no empire so cruel as to gild a living body. They called it allegory, a fiction spun by priests, but the evidence refuses to stay buried. Gold fragments recovered from beneath the hippodrome bear traces of organic matter, collagen, human protein, remnants of heat-altered skin. The scorch marks carved into the marble base align with the description in a 6th century codex. A woman, bound upright, transformed into an image of divine radiance. Even the dust tells a story. Beneath its glitter, it hums faintly when struck, as though the metal itself remembers the scream that forged it. And so, the myth of the woman who wouldn't die persists, half cautionary, half sacred. It terrified an empire that believed transformation was salvation. To the Byzantines, beauty was not simply admired, it was sanctified. The human form, perfected, became a vessel for the divine. Pain was purification, gold the seal of eternity. But in their hunger to preserve holiness, they forgot that the body they worshipped was still alive. Imagine the faith that demanded such creation. Imagine the terror when it began to move. In the dim glow of an oil lamp, the artisans and priests who oversaw her transfiguration must have believed they were crafting an icon, a living bridge between heaven and earth. But when her breath rattled beneath the gilded shell, when her eyes gleamed with something that was not quite death, they realized what they had made was neither miracle nor martyr. It was blasphemy incarnate. The golden woman of Constantinople was never meant to die. She was meant to endure, silent, shimmering, imprisoned beneath her own perfection. A symbol of devotion turned into a mirror of guilt. Even after her body was entombed and melted, the image endured. Beauty that kills, worship that consumes, art that refuses to die. When pilgrims later entered the Hagia Sophia and drank from chalices said to contain her melted gold, they described a strange taste, metallic, almost sweet, like the trace of breath left too long in a sealed room. Some said it was the flavor of eternity. Others called it the taste of sin. And if the old psalter speaks truth, she was not entirely gone. One line, scratched in the margins by an unknown monk, whispers through time, "The idol still breathes beneath the earth." Perhaps it is only metaphor. Or perhaps, somewhere beneath the hippodrome, under centuries of stone, water, and empire, the air still vibrates faintly, as though stirred by lungs that refuse to rest. Listen closely when you walk those streets at night. Beneath the laughter, the hum of engines, the weight of history. You might hear it too, a low, rhythmic sound, faint as a heartbeat beneath metal. The idol still breathes beneath the earth. Beneath the marble floors of Constantinople's great palace, where incense drifted through corridors and oil lamps burned blue with copper flame, there existed a chamber that no map recorded. The walls were lined with crucibles, alembics, and basins etched with sigils that no priest dared translate. The air shimmered with heat. To step inside was to enter a world where creation and destruction were indistinguishable, where molten metals hissed like serpents, and the stench of scorched flesh was called purification. It began not as cruelty, but as curiosity. When Rome turned Christian, the old gods were melted down, their statues reforged into chalices and reliquaries, but somewhere in that act of transformation, the idea inverted. If metal could be sanctified by divine use, could flesh not be transmuted by divine fire? In the 4th century, imperial alchemists claimed they could purify the human soul through a fusion of art and torment. They called it metallos phosphoros, the light-bearing metal. The earliest record comes from the private journals of Bishop Emilianus of Antioch, written around 378 CE. He describes witnessing a conversion by flame in which a heretic was painted with quicksilver until his mortal stain was made radiant. The process was described in reverent tones, the victim's body washed, anointed, and brushed with liquid silver. To the spectators, it appeared miraculous. The condemned shimmered with divine brilliance, their cries echoing like hymns through the basilica vaults. Emilianus wrote, "We watched the flesh tremble, then still, and the metal keep its shape. It was as if the body refused to decay." Historians once dismissed such accounts as symbolic, a metaphor for spiritual renewal. But modern forensic analysis tells a colder story. In 1997, researchers studying a fragment of Byzantine silver effigy from the ruins of Antioch found beneath its surface a thin stratum of organic collagen, human skin, fused with silver nitrate. The effigy wasn't molded, it was grown around a living body. By the reign of Justinian, this ritual had become state-sanctioned theology. In the palace workshops, goldsmiths and priests worked side by side. Their goal was no longer punishment, but permanence. They believed that by sealing the body within precious metal, they could preserve not only the form, but the consciousness, the nous, the divine spark itself. The condemned were selected carefully: heretics, dissenting monks, and occasionally volunteers. In the Codex Metallorum, a fragmentary manual attributed to a monk named Isidorus, instructions survive for a ritual he called transfiguratio corporalis. Begin when the moon is new. The subject shall fast for 7 days, confess thrice, and be washed in wine. Let molten bronze be cooled by breath and spread upon the skin while prayers are sung. The words "spread upon the skin" are followed by a smudge, perhaps ink, perhaps blood. Inside those workshops, the line between worship and execution blurred completely. The priests recited litanies as artisans applied the metals in thin layers, timing each stage with chants and psalms. The victims' shivers were seen as divine signs, their gasps as proof of the soul's resistance to the body's decay. To the observers, these were not deaths, but metamorphoses. And to the empire, they served a powerful purpose. A gilded heretic did not decompose. He became an idol of obedience. Rumors spread of statues that seemed too lifelike, their veins faintly visible beneath the sheen. In Alexandria, a silver martyr displayed in the Patriarch's Hall reportedly emitted heat for weeks after his transformation. Pilgrims touched the figure's hands, claiming they felt a pulse. When one novice asked his master how this could be, the old man replied simply, "The metal remembers." Across the empire, artisans competed to perfect the ritual's beauty. The more exquisite the statue, the holier the message, yet every refinement deepened the cruelty. Gold sealed the skin, mercury stilled the mind, bronze prolonged the dying. The more divine they looked, the longer they suffered, and the more they suffered, the greater their supposed sanctity. By the 6th century, these ceremonies became clandestine. Officially denounced as heresy, they persisted beneath monasteries and palaces. Byzantine mosaics began to depict shining saints whose metallic halos extended beyond their heads, covering their bodies entirely. One fresco from Cappadocia, discovered in 1971, shows a figure with gold-painted skin kneeling before Christ. Beneath the gilding, microscopic scans revealed layers of human dermis in the pigment itself. The artist had literally mixed skin into the paint, transforming the medium of worship into the evidence of sacrifice. What drove them to such extremes? Fear of death, perhaps, or the unbearable tension between body and soul that haunted the Byzantine mind. They lived in a world of mirrors, divinity reflected through matter, salvation glimpsed through suffering. In their theology, beauty was a weapon against decay. But every weapon, once wielded, demands a victim. One story survives of a monk named Petros, who offered himself for transfiguration. In his final hours, he whispered to his abbot, "When they cover my eyes, I will see forever." 3 hours later, his body was encased in a bronze shell so fine that sunlight passed through its seams. The abbot recorded that for 2 days after, the bronze gave off the scent of myrrh. No one knows where Petros was buried. Some say his statue still stands in an underground chapel near the Bosporus, facing east, eyes open. Archaeologists have found nothing, only empty sockets where statues once stood, the floors stained with mercury and wine. The workshop beneath the palace was sealed sometime after 540 CE. The fires were doused, the crucibles buried under stone, but traces linger, the faint shimmer of gold dust in the cracks of the marble, the chemical ghost of vaporized mercury in the air. When restoration crews entered the site in 2014, their instruments recorded inexplicable temperature fluctuations, like the slow exhale of something long entombed. In that silence, the question lingers. Did they truly believe they were saving souls? Or were they forging something darker? Icons that watched, remembered, endured. No records mention the last transfiguration, but one fragment of a psalm, scratched onto a piece of lead found near the workshop, remains legible. He is metal, yet he breathes. And somewhere in the labyrinth beneath the palace, the bronze chambers still hum faintly, as if the alchemy of agony was never truly extinguished, only waiting for fire to wake it again. Beneath the cracked mosaics of Hagia Sophia, where centuries of candle smoke had turned the saints the color of dusk, a team of archaeologists knelt over a sealed stone lid. The air was heavy with lime dust and silence, a silence so deep it seemed to pulse. When the final wedge was pried loose, heat escaped, faint but unmistakable, as if something below still breathed. Their lights swept across a chamber glimmering with metallic forms. Men, women, children, all cast in bronze, each face frozen mid-expression. Then came the strangest discovery of all. When one researcher pressed a gloved hand to a statue's chest, she swore she felt warmth, as though the metal remembered blood. At first, they dismissed it as residual heat, a trick of the mind, yet the instruments confirmed a mild vibration, a hum too faint for the ear but steady as a pulse. The statues were not cold relics, they were resonating, and the question rose like incense in that ancient dark. Had the Byzantines, in their feverish pursuit of eternity, found a way to trap the living within the stillness of art? The voice of history answered only in fragments. A 10th-century monk named Alexios of Trebizond wrote of holy effigies whose souls sing faintly when struck by light. Another chronicler, more daring, called them bodies gilded by grace, preserved by fire. These were dismissed for centuries as pious exaggerations. But standing there, in that subterranean crypt, those words no longer felt allegorical. They felt like testimony. Through soot-blackened corridors, the archaeologists traced an older tunnel leading eastward to what had once been an artisan's quarter. There, half buried beneath collapsed vaults, they found frescoes showing craftsmen at their work, men hammering gold leaf over naked bodies, women pouring molten alloys into human-shaped molds. The frescoes were damaged, yet the gestures were unmistakable. The victims were alive. Their eyes were wide, their mouths open not in prayer, but in soundless screams. Centuries earlier, theologians had whispered that divine matter could preserve the soul, that to cover flesh in metal was to suspend decay, and perhaps consciousness itself. Was that the secret that lingered here, beneath the sanctified stone? If so, how many of these saints were unwilling martyrs gilded in the name of eternity? The trail of such forbidden artistry did not die with Byzantium's fall. In the 15th century, a Venetian trader recorded visiting a monastery near the Black Sea, where icons were not painted, but made from bodies rendered incorruptible. From there, the idea traveled west, carried by rumor and obsession. Renaissance metallurgists, in their hunger for immortality, began to pursue the living alloy, a fusion of human essence and gold. In Florence, 1486, the apprentice of Verrocchio claimed his master spoke of a statue that murmured when warmed by the sun. In Nuremberg, an alchemist named Theophilus sought to replicate the effect, sealing animals in copper molds under mercurial vapor. He called the process spiritus ice, the breath of bronze. Each experiment ended in death, but he noted something chilling. Their forms retain motion long after the heart ceases. In Rome, the Church condemned the tales as heresy, yet its own halls whispered with relics that hummed like trapped voices. And in Constantinople's crypt, a gilded woman exhaled through bronze, as if time itself had paused to breathe. The next day, the crypt was sealed again under orders from the Patriarchate, officially cited as a matter of heritage preservation. The findings were never published, yet among those who had descended, none could forget the sound, the faint hum that followed them long after they'd left, like the residue of a heartbeat that refused extinction. And so the story comes full circle. What began as punishment became prophecy. The Byzantines, in their hunger for divine permanence, may have created something they could neither destroy nor explain. Every age since has gilded its horrors, calling them art, calling them faith. But deep beneath the foundations of St. Sophia, in the gilded dark, the silence endures, vibrant, waiting. And if you press your ear to the earth long enough, you might still hear it. A faint whisper rising through stone and centuries, murmuring the words that refuse to die. I am still here.